a roll of a die and a grumble filled with expletives. The fates finished the game that would decide my day. I was to grace a Hale Barnes tea and cake shop my presence. Fortunate for me, as they created the most fanciful and arousing cakes, but not so fortunate for shopkeeper and our clientele, as the very sight of my squalid figure would dampen the day. Ever the charitable gentleman, I was more than happy to oblige. The shop bell cheerily chirped my arrival. As soon as I set foot in the shop, all conversations quickly stopped, and slowly, pair by pair, snarling vicious eyes set themselves on me. They waited a brief second to see if I would realize the error of my ways, and act for good sport by leaving. It was not to be. As soon as I sauntered to the counter, they all simultaneously fell back into their conversations. It was obvious what they thought. Even the old school teachers who had so often tried to hammer in the point not to judge a book by its cover would have joined them in their silent rage at my intrusion. The 4x4s, the litter-free streets, the beautifully decorated houses, the artistically groomed gardens and foliage, and the pavements without the smears of dog shit. It was damn near treason that I did not realize that these were the stomping grounds of superior stock. Only the most wretched would not take heed of a hierarchy that for centuries had bled into England's green pastures. To them it was misspent taxes, as I clearly did not know that my place at the dining table was beneath it. A younger self would have found this silent hostility rather disconcerting. In fact, a younger self would have demonstrated that I was indeed not an inferior species and had every right to be there. Such prejudiced flares would instantly evaporate if I decided to educate them in the harsh realities. Even though I am a firm believer that one is never too old to learn, I had entered the shop for a simple reason, and that reason was for cake. I sauntered towards the counter with my eyes wide and a devilish grin that was jagged like a broken window. I salivated with anticipation, so much so that drool crept out the corners of my mouth and abseiled down to the floor. The cakes were all excitedly lined up, and they paraded their sultry attractions behind glass as if they were in the red light district of Amsterdam. There were cakes dressed in colourful frilly icings like can girls. I saw cakes seductively positioned with only delicately placed creams and glazed fruits that barely hid the most tempting of curves. There were terribly vulgar cakes that showed their perfectly layered insides, and the pastries, they were disguised to look so light and innocent that one would have never guessed their true bestial nature. All of them waited to be ravished by my bean, but only at the right price. I was so close, but as the shopkeeper was not to be seen, I was also tormentingly far. Like a child on Christmas Eve who sees his presents wrapped up underneath the tree, I waited miserably. I was so close to giving in to these sirens mercilessly teased me so. With resolute will, I dealt with my predicament by forcing my focus away from the cakes, and I decided to look around and listen to the clientele's conversations instead. Not the ideal escape, but I was not able to think of any other alternative. I listened to a shrill conversation between two middle-aged women. They yapped about dieting. The sound was intermittently muffled by a cake being shoved down their gullets. Undoubtedly, they believed that by talking about dieting they were achieving some sort of healthiness. However, their bingo wings disagreed. My ears moved on to a young lady and a man who both spoke excitedly about the absurd TV soap they had watched the previous night. The episode involved a young female patient being molested by her overweight doctor while she was suffering from an epileptic shock. With great awe, the assault came to an abrupt halt as the seizure had become so violent that it caused her to kick a nearby cupboard, which then shook a large crystal trophy off a shelf to careen down and fatally fall onto the rapist's head. I then switched my interest to two young ladies who fired fact upon fact about themselves in fast Morse code beeps. I barely understood what they were saying as gigabyte upon gigabyte of information rushed out of their mouths and invaded my ears in a full-on assault. I was just about able to make out the lad said something about university, strange exclamations about clothes, and I swear to whatever deity would listen to me as they spoke in praise of unicorns. The information was just far too much, and my brain glitched in error, so I had to give it a good few whacks to get it back in running order again. Listening to the public was all too much for me, and instead of distracting me, made my craving for cake worse. A whiff of a heavenly black forest gateau took advantage of my wanton state and crept down my nose to caress my belly. I purred in response. I turned back around to stare forlornly at the cakes again. My lust became such a burden that my knees trembled with its weight. Drool soon flowed again, so I sucked the excess fluid in and quickly closed my gaped mouth, wiped it, and pressed my face hard against the counter's glass. I was but centimetres away from those temptresses. Control and good manners were being trounced by the gluttonous barbarian inside me. I then moaned and whined in frustration, each moan and whine getting louder and louder, until suddenly the shopkeeper announced her presence with a shrill, out-of-tune violin of a voice.
"Excuse me, sir. Can I help you?"
At first, I ignored this question that was riddled with scorn, but then it was fired at me again.
"I said, excuse me, can I help you?"
It soon dawned on me who it was, so I quickly pulled my face away from the counter, stood bolt upright to see before me a chubby middle-aged shop attendant who I had not seen in the shop before. She wore a long, pale purple cardigan that tightly drooped over her rolls and rippled down low, so she resembled a fondue. Her nose was long, hooked, and decorated with red splodges that could not be hidden by her makeup. Also, her plump face resembled an overburdened bellboy carrying huge bags. The shopkeeper finally arrived, and a burst of euphoria shot into me, as this, of course, meant cake. Her face quickly became one of shock and panic when she saw my full visage. If only it was my sense of fashion that caused such anxiety, as it certainly wasn't the height of vogue. My attire composed of a long, tattered dark brown leather trench coat, black combat pants that were kind enough to hide all sorts of stains, a black woolen turtleneck that was decorated with small holes, and a pair of well-worn black steel-toe cap boots. I also had my trusty tattered and torn rucksack on my shoulders, which was always filled with indispensable goodies and tools, but perhaps her reaction was more down to what I actually looked like as a human being. About my actual self, I imagine that when Mother Nature was sprinkling the Y chromosome into my primordial goo, the lid must have fallen off and the contents spilled in. After that, life spent a great deal of time and consideration violently chiselling its mark onto me. My large and obscenely square head housed a heavy thick brow that was akin to an East Island statue's. I also had long black chains and knotted hair, and my greasy black beard was a writhing nest of snakes. Then there were my long muscular arms, which admittedly might have added to people's view that I was lagging behind in the evolutionary process. These arms were married to a large pair of thick, callous and scar-ridden hands that were surprisingly nimble and delicate when the situation required. All this sat on a frame so broad that at times I'd have to enter the doorway sideways. It was my almond-shaped eyes and naturally tanned skin that made me a candidate for a far-right caricature of foreign evil that has come to corrupt all that is holy in this land. There was also my scars. These were so numerous that it appeared I'd been smashed to pieces and then haphazardly stuck back together again. Because my face at that moment beamed with delighted friendliness, the shopkeeper quickly reverted to her belligerent and condescending ways.
"Sir, this is a place for paying customers."
Without giving me time to respond, she spoke rudely again.
"Sir, if you're not a paying customer, then I will have to ask you to leave."
Those last words immediately caused my smile to disappear and my face to become distorted with anger. Terrible thoughts of actually being denied cake by this torrid woman tormented my mind. My heart pounded out a furious beat, my shoulders hunched, veins protruded on my neck, my fists became tightly clenched, and my brow buckled down with the pressure of my rage.
"Sir,"
she added meekly as she saw what she had done. I interrupted her with a growl that showed her what sort of beast she had tried to dominate.
Now look here, I will call the...
She tried to say before I interrupted her again with an even louder growl.
Please, will you?
Again I interrupted with a growl, and my mouth had also started to froth. I carried this on until she was completely quiet and still. The shop had become deathly silent, and all eyes were on myself and the shopkeeper. Most faces showed curiosity and a fear that terrible violence was about to occur. I really did not wish to carry on this silly charade any longer, so with a contemptuous look I reached into the inner breast pocket of my trench coat. The shopkeeper's gaze and all the clientele's dropped to that hand. Her brain must have formulated possibility upon possibility of unpleasantness as her face anxiously contorted more and more whilst I rummaged around my pocket. Suddenly I ripped my hand out of my pocket and slammed it on the counter with a thunderous force, making the shopkeeper and a few of the clientele yelp in fear. The old woman's lips trembled and her eyes moistened, yet she was not able to avert her gaze away from mine. She must have read my face as not one ready for bloody murder, as a faint with urine mixed into the air. I nodded down to indicate that she should look at my hand. The silly thing didn't quite understand. The rouge on her cheeks could not hide the fact that her face had become a few shades paler. Again nodded down for her to look at my hand on the counter. This time she caught on, and her eye slowly drifted down, and with a slightly melodramatic flair, I ever so slowly pulled away my hand to reveal 2 crumpled £20 notes. "Why, my dear, of course I am a paying customer," I boomed with a chummy grin. The shopkeeper slowly looked up at my face again, but she dared not look directly into my eyes. Clearly it was her brain that now malfunctioned, but I was not feeling charitable enough to give it a whack to help organise her thoughts. Confusion jumped into the rabble of emotions that was on her face. "Well, now that you understand that I am a paying customer, would you be so kind as to allow me a taste of the fine delicacies you have on offer?" I asked jovially with a cheeky wink. It took more than a few seconds of silence before she responded.
"Oh, yes, you indeed are a paying customer. I am sorry,"
the shopkeeper said, giving a sigh of defeat. I tapped on the glass ever so lightly with my hand, but the sound still echoed throughout the silent shop. The shopkeeper's eyes slowly fell and saw the cake that I wanted. "My dear, that one, please." It was a black forest gatto provocatively dressed in cream, cherries, and shavings of chocolate. "The whole cake, please," I added politely.
"Yes, cake."
Even though her hands trembled and her face was ghostly, she still deftly served me the desserts. There the most provocative gâteau lay on top of the counter in an open pink box. The smell of freshly whipped cream, the dark cherries of a chocolate sponge rushed up into my nostrils. It was heavenly and tantalizing. The temptress gave me a look that begged for immediate defilement, and to that suggestion I was not one to say no. I simply could not contain myself, and as good manners clearly did not belong in this shop, I felt no need to restrain the inner glutton inside me. So with a guilt-free abandon, I smothered my face with a black forest gâteau. The absolute delight I felt from this act, the sensational taste that exploded in my mouth, words could not do justice to what I experienced. I burrowed into the cake like a starved pig at its trough, occasionally coming up for breath and to give orgasmic moans. Then, as quickly as it begun, it was over. I had consumed her. All that was left were the last remnants of cake on my face. I slowly and methodically wiped the cake off my face with my finger and savoured the last morsels. At first, part of me felt a painful sorrow for the cake's demise, but this was quickly taken over by a feeling of grateful contentment. I let out a rapturous belch in acknowledgement of a pleasurable experience. But the shopkeeper did not appear to register such compliments. Having consumed a whole cake, I had become rather parched, so I looked around the shop for an adequate drink to follow such a feast. The clientele averted their eyes whenever they met mine. My gaze eventually fell upon a delicate china teapot that nestled on a table where young couples sat. I must admit I am a slave to a good cup of tea. It is an addiction that I have never conquered. I sauntered over to this couple, who both tried ever so hard to pretend that I did not exist. The young man was quite a chiselled chap, blond, tall, smartly dressed and well built, what most would describe as good-looking. His lady friend could have passed as a sibling. She was similar to him, but in a feminine way. She was blonde, tall, attractive, fashionable, and possessed the right curves in all the right places. "Hello, young man. I see that you're drinking tea there," I declared, as I pointed at an intricate teapot and delicate cups. The young man's eyes still faced downward, and he did not respond. His lady friend had turned her head completely away, a common reaction to me from women. As one would rightly assume, I was someone who found being ignored rather rude. "If you insist down this path, I will take it as an insult. Such affronts against myself will always lead to consequences. Consequences that I assure you will find most uncomfortable. Now, young man, please not be so rude as not to look at me when I talk to you," I hissed. He slowly and begrudgingly looked up. I could see the rage in his eyes, but that emotion was quickly extinguished as he looked straight into the windows of my soul. "Sorry, sir, it is tea," he quietly spluttered, like a reprimanded schoolboy. "Tea, you say? Interesting. I am rather parched after eating so much cake." Again there was silence, and the young man had failed to realise what I had insinuated. I said, "I'm rather parched." The cogs slowly turned in this young man's head as he tried to understand what I wanted. Quite clearly his cognitive abilities weren't his forte. His companion turned around sharply and enlightened him. "He wants some fucking tea." "Oh, would you like some tea, sir?" "Why, thank you, young man. How kind of you to offer. Of course I would." I grabbed the teapot, took one of the dainty cups and filled it with a golden brown liquid, and then added a smidgen of milk, just enough to complement the flavour. "There's sugar as well, sir." I gave him a scowl of disgust in response. As I held the small cup, I breathed in the mellow and smooth aromas, then sipped. It was divine. I then swished the beautiful English breakfast tea delicately round my mouth. As I savoured the taste, it evoked a poetic calm throughout my body, and even more so as it trickled down my gullet. Time was indeed relative, and in that moment it had almost stopped. One could almost forgive the British for their centuries of cruel bastardization of the world, as without it, such an abundance of tea on these shores would not to be. As soon as I finished with tea, I was brought back to reality and realised it was time for me to go. I thanked the couple for their gracious generosity, and I also thanked the shopkeeper for her tremendous culinary skills. With a sunny smile and a spring in my step, I left.